Welcome to the Creation Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth King. Together, we'll have conversations with incredible human beings who have taken their creative outlet and turned it into something innovative. From people leaving the corporate world to be 8-figure entrepreneurs to people who have created books, created a family, or just creating to have fun in the world. We are all in a journey to create something amazing in our lives, and I hope that you find some inspiration of your own here. This is the Creation Innovation Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to Creation Innovation. Today we have Dr. Janelle Luke. Welcome, Dr. Luke.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing, Elizabeth, for having me to be part of Creation Innovation. We met now, my time flies. It was like right around Chinese New Year time.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, or maybe even a little more. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Luke in person and was able to get into their office, which was great. Let me just give your bio a little bit, Dr. Luke. She's the co-founder and medical director at Generation Next Fertility. She is a top board certified reproductive endocrinologist seeking to empower women through individualized fertility treatments, specializing in areas such as diminished ovarian reserve, infertility of unknown causes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and recurrent pregnancy loss. I am so thrilled to talk to you today. It's been a while since we've kind of delved into things like this on the podcast. And this is always something that a passion of mine. And I feel these messages and education that we get out to people regarding these conversations really helps those that are starting either down the path or on the path and feeling quite hopeless or wherever they may be. So today, we just wanted to talk a little bit about infertility and access to proper education and resources and women's empowerment, as well as Dr. Luke, what you do that may be a little bit different from others, because I know from meeting you and having some mutual clients that you don't give up easily, let's say, right? So, and I love that we're now on a quest from the patient's perspective, I think, and you and I had this conversation a little bit when we were there, that not only does it matter to find a doctor that you feel comfortable with, but also somebody that's willing to look into that a little deeper. So not just to accept it's unexplained infertility. Well, what does that mean? And what can I do about that? And how can I get my baby, right? That's basically the end all result of what people are coming to you for. So, all that to say, let's jump in with education. And it always surprises me that we are so uneducated in this country and many others as well about our fertility and all things around that. But then when you get into this world of infertility, so to speak, what do you think is the most important thing that people are either lacking in knowing or that they should know?
Elizabeth, great question. It was so funny. I don't know, maybe my mind has some intuition. I already believe ESP, like, I don't know, but I was just getting off the subway and I said, what defines education? And what makes education important at different time points?
Right.
So education, to my passion in my career about your ovaries, reproductive system. But it turns out fertility has lots of unknowns. So even education between the known versus the unknowns are so important. What does it mean? Or things that you can control versus things you cannot control.
Right.
So to just start with education, I'm going to start with the simple ones, as
Yes.
in the ones that are black and white. What do you mean, Dr. Luke? Well, do you have insurance and finance to do it? If you do have insurance and finance to do it, what do you need to know about it? So that is black and white, because if you cannot afford, you don't have insurance, then IVF may not be a option. So what other options are there? So that is the finance black and white part.
Right.
Second part is, do you know about your ovaries, which is then now is a whole slew of women, from women who not yet decide to have babies to women who has been trying for 6-7 cycles and come to me. What kind of education do they need as a woman? And that is also different, because a woman may not want to know her menopausal years, what's the age of menopause when they are 25 coming to me about egg freezing, because they likely most of them are 40s, 50s. Yes, there are ones that are have a different kind of ovaries. They may have early menopause. Yes, they would love to know. So, but majority, about 90% of the world, would not have early menopause. But yes, you are here for your education. So, what type of education does this patient need? Does she need to know the benefit of IVF versus the benefit of egg freezing? Is it two different benefit, two different knowledge?
Right.
And finally, the third type of education is what type of IVF, and is there any types that's suitable for certain ovaries, which is, I think, get into the kind of third. I can divide these three categories into 1 to 20,
Please
quite honestly.
do,
But
because I think that's a great road to go down because most people have never even heard that term that you just said, that there's different types of IVF. So I would,
I'm going
yes,
to,
please keep going.
yeah, so the three, I will go from three to one, I guess.
Okay.
One is the insurance money part, which is the one that I just talked about. Two, which is to describe who are you? Why do you even need to know for two? Do you need to know? Do you not need to know? If you do
Right.
want to know, what do you need to know? So that's number
And I
two.
would argue
And,
that everybody should know because I think
okay,
that our
that's
body tells us about our overall health, right? Like our
yeah,
cycles
that's right.
do
That is
tell us
right.
information about our health in general. So I
Why
would
would you
say,
not want to know? Right. And
yeah,
people
that
say
everybody should be
the
familiar to
menstrual
some degree.
cycle is a vital sign. You can see here is
Exactly.
one of the chapter of ACOG, American College of OBGYN, is a vital sign. It's not just your heart
Yes.
rate, what day in your cycle. And then the third, which is what you get at, is IVF and different types. So yes, I one of the things I really very excited about is natural IVF and myostimulation IVF. And that excitement came when I was in my years of training. I guess that's 12, 13 years ago during my fellowship years, the last couple of years, where I have was exposed to stimulation that use much less medication. On
Mhm.
ovaries, this does not have lots of quantity. Haha. So
And is
if
that considered mini IVF for people that are listening, or is
yeah,
it different then?
so we call mini IVF, some places
Okay.
call mild IVF, some places called ultra. I know there's so many names, ultra mild IVF, but
Okay.
basically it's using less medication to ovaries. And usually we do this, and some of this is where the unknown, educated about what's unknown, no. We don't know. We know that quantity can sometimes help, such as for younger patients. The more eggs, and usually I use the word lottery tickets. I hope I don't offend
Mhm.
anyone in the field, maybe in lottery. But basically, you're buying as many eggs or any lottery tickets as you need to try to hit the right egg. Why,
Mhm.
Dr. Lu? Because all of our eggs are not supposed to be normal. There's a significant number of eggs that are not normal. And yes, the bad eggs, quote unquote, because how do you define bad? But I will define that later. But the bad eggs or eggs that are not meant to be euploid will increase the number of quantity as you get older. And that's why no great doctors can reverse the chart and say, yo, it's easier to get pregnant at 41, or it's as easy as when you're 30, 25. If you come to me,
Right.
no one can say that because you cannot change the reality of bad eggs start to increase in ratio as the woman get older. So the typical idea back when the first IVF baby was born and all that is that more eggs, hopefully, will get a what we call conventional stimulation or traditional IVF cycle. We'll put as many meds to the system as possible to get as many eggs so that hopefully we get to a good egg out of the bunch. And yes, Dr. Luke, what do you do with your egg donors? We don't want three. We don't want, obviously we want them to give us 24 eggs or 20 eggs at the age of less than 28 years old, usually when we recruit them. And then hopefully we can kind of their batching or split the batches to different couples who need in need of a donor egg. And that's what
Right.
donor bank does, by the way.
Mhm.
So, but then in the 30s, same idea if you have good quantity. However, there's a group of patients called diminished ovarian reserve, means they have less eggs. And when that happens, how to define it, that means they may only have 2 to 4 follicles on the ovaries. The AMH is low. The FS low means, I'm so sorry to your audience, with AMH. AMH is anti-Müllerian hormone.
And
Normal
what's
level.
the number that would be considered low if somebody's listening?
Usually, this is a range. So I
Mhm.
usually, the range is really trouble for some of our patients. So
Right.
2.5 is usually the number I usually talk about to use as a reference point. So guys, if it's, what about 2.0? It's about 2.0, 2.5. If any of your audience is like, holding on to the exact number.
Right.
Usually it's at the age of 30, I always say, and usually equates to around 10 eggs. It can be 15. Don't get, it can be also be eight.
Mhm.
So don't, it's a range. But you're
Mhm.
unlikely to be one. So I usually say, hey, if you're 30 years of age and you're around 2.5, around, so 2.0 to 3, that's pretty good. And what about I'm 10.0, which I have a patient today came in, don't cry, it's okay. It's just so that you have lots of eggs, and that's why you're 10. Okay.
Mhm.
However, when patients come to me also with tears and they are 1.7, they're like, Dr. Luke,
Mhm.
you just Elizabeth's show. It's like, well, actually, AMH number does not define who you are. So you also need a doctor to look at your ovaries and also how young you are. What does that mean?
Right.
Fertility and quality, this is where the unknown comes in. There's no blood work to show how many good eggs you have. And you also does not need 12 good eggs to have one child. It's actually one good egg, one good
Mhm.
sperm, one baby. Okay, so
Yeah.
you don't need like I need 100 eggs to have a baby. That's
Right.
not true.
Mhm.
So if you are just having sex and you are a young couple at 29 and you went into your AMH because you went through this program and you saw point 0.9, please don't cry. Go
Mhm.
have lots of sex and make sure hopefully you get pregnant. That
Mhm.
means you're very fertile because you're 29, because it's the
Mhm.
age that defines the quality. And then is that something you should be aware? Yeah, in some ways, now you acknowledge that you have a lower AMH. You may want to have a second child not when you're 40 years old, maybe at the
Exactly.
age of 33 or
Yeah.
32. So that gives you some guidance of when to, but quite honest, Elizabeth, just be very bluntly, I don't tell no matter how high the AMH, I don't like, let's say someone AMH is 4.0 or 32, I don't like, oh, go
Take your time.
home, don't worry. When you're great, you're going to be fertile until 38 because your AMH. No. On the other hand,
Mhm.
you don't justify patients because age alone is the indicator of fertility and quality of eggs and how long you have tried.
And there's no
So
correlation necessarily if you have a 4.0 at 1 year that it's not gonna you don't know that
decrease.
year to year it decreases
Yes,
at a certain rate. It
that's
could
right.
be the next year really low, right?
That's
So
right. That's right.
you can't necessarily, I don't think, I'm asking you, depend on a higher level at that age to say, "Oh, I have lots of time."
Yeah, that is exactly true. So AMH is really based on is really good correlates with a quantity. Some AMH also with the years I get maybe 10,000 AMHs. There are AMH does not correlate. That's why we
Hmm.
not yet computer can replace doctors. Hopefully,
Thank
uh,
goodness.
but I've seen patients with low AMH also have high quantity of eggs. And then the patient, what does that mean? I was well, maybe the cell types around it did not produce certain hormones and enzymes, and sometimes that can happen. And
And
AMH
I
does not usually affect too much by birth control pills. So that's also important for you to.
And just to add to wrap up that AMH comment is that if you have low AMH, that does not mean that you cannot have a baby. And I think people hear that and they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have infertility and I'm not going to be able to get pregnant and all the things. I'm sure you and I both have seen many, many people that have been able to not only get pregnant naturally, but also, with assistance. So it's really just a number that guides the doctor and or your own relationship and information of, again, back to education of how maybe you should proceed.
Yes, you're great. And we can tie back to AMH and IVF. So when patients have
Mhm.
lower AMH, there is a lot more options, especially when patient paying out of pocket with meds. It's very expensive. So I usually try not to use too much high dose of medication because if I always use this analogy, if the ping pong bag has only three ping pong balls, no matter how hard you stimulate, there's only three ping pong balls. So you can't suddenly become 10. I have patients like, I want to increase and I'm sorry, I
Mhm.
can't maybe go to Elizabeth or go to acupuncturist or coaching or whatever it is to make your lifestyle relax, but it doesn't matter. I
It
don't
is
want
what it
to
is.
say anything, to make your audience think you can increase. You can't. That's the quantity, but it does fluctuate throughout the year. The
Mhm.
fluctuation, depending on your biological clock, was it built in your genetics. So I have seen some patient where they're 5, they keep on waiting. Somehow the 9 eggs will come, but it doesn't suddenly go to 20. So
Right.
no matter how they fluctuate,
It's always gonna be within that range, and if you're lucky, it could be a couple more, but most of the time, from what I've seen, it stays around there or it might decrease a little bit on one side or the other, but yeah. have not seen that either, where somebody might go from 4 follicles to 20 in, 6 months or something. No.
Right. And then mild IVF and really go back to how do we stimulate, and the natural IVF becomes very important for some of these patients. And one more type of patients I didn't explain is when traditional IVF fails now. So when that happens, also the natural and mild has a way to help these patients, because really weird, some patients doesn't respond, and that's where Gen X came. We now Gen X, I think Generation Next Fertility is a little bit more, I guess, famous in the mainstream. So then when patients come in, some of them just do a traditional cycle, which is great. Any places can take 20
Mhm.
eggs, 8 normal. What to do, Dr. Luke? I mean, I don't. Those are very it's easy, bread and butter for us. And for any doctor, you can go anywhere, really. Find a doctor you like, they should able to stimulate and get you if you have no issues. But when patients have failed or didn't do well in other centers of traditional, this is also when we really switch out their protocol and try to really individualize it. Because it's not, and I want to be honest, it doesn't work for everyone. No matter what we stim, sometimes, no matter how like precise or the protocol, sometimes it's still very difficult. So I just want to be honest about that. But we do have a little bit more outside the box tools. We work with oral medications. We sometimes do growth hormone HGH with some patients. So those are the things where traditional and conventional IVF may not, will accommodate that.
And I appreciate you being honest about that, because I think a lot of people finally get to that point of, okay, I'm going to visit a fertility doctor. I'm finally made this decision of I've saved up my money or whatever it may be. So we're going to do IVF. And they think that just by doing that and saying we're going to do IVF means they're going to have their baby in 10 months. And unfortunately, it's not always that straightforward. It can mean multiple rounds. It could be playing around with the different protocols to see what works for you and what doesn't. And I think just people having that information up front to know, yes, it's the step, but it doesn't always happen on the first try, unfortunately. And I think people sometimes spend a long time thinking, I really don't want to do IVF. And they have it built up in their head that it's so difficult and they're not going to be able to do the shots or the expense or whatever it may be, only to find out it isn't a guarantee, unfortunately. And the more that you have a doctor that's willing to dig in with you and almost put the puzzle together as you go along, because if you're not a straightforward case like she was mentioning before, it does sometimes take some trial and error to say, okay, we're going to try this, that didn't work, let's change that up. And I think the best case scenario from patients that I have seen is the doctors that are willing to do that, instead of saying time over time we're doing the same protocol and it's not working. Like, to me, that's frustrating. Why are we banging our head against the wall with the same protocol if we're not getting the result that we want? So I appreciate you being honest with that, because I think it's important for people to understand that. Same thing that I say with egg freezing. I think a lot of young women go into the idea of, I'm going to save my eggs for later, not really understanding the full extent of the process of, you may start with this amount, but how does it end up once they're fertilized and everything is very different. And I think some of the clinics out there right now that are selling specials on egg freezing are not really giving the full picture of what that looks like sometimes. So,
Absolutely. Egg freezing is also another uncertainty, and sometimes not as easy. Lots of this. I mean, I'm in the fertility business. Obviously, I love my patients. Just come here and do egg freezing. I really want to understand patients' logic and the reasoning behind it. Sometimes, not that I decline, they all have their reasons to do it, but
mhm,
I want to make sure the reasons make sure it is coherent with the medical side of things. It's like, I want to egg freezing, so I guarantee I have a baby. I was like, don't do it, because it's
mhm,
not a guarantee. It's not something that would definitely, because you do egg freeze, will have a baby. So egg freezing, what does egg freezing mean to some patients? I also explain to them it is insurance that you're buying for the future. There's lots of uncertainties. So educating patients about uncertainty is so important.
mhm.
Uncertainties is so important to be empowered. Like, what are the uncertainties? We
Yeah,
don't
the
know.
expectations.
Yeah, because when you get the Excel,
Mhm,
how many good or bad? Well, I can tell
mhm.
they're mature or not mature, but do I know how many chromosomes in the egg? The answer is no. In order for me to know, I would have to kill the egg. Well, that doesn't serve any
Defeats the
purpose.
purpose.
Defeat the purpose. So we can't. So we just say we froze your 9 eggs or
Mhm.
10 eggs. Dr. Luke, how can you tell me? And I usually equate egg freezing and knowing about egg freezing, like you going to a supermarket to buy eggs, you cannot see the egg yolk, but you can see the outside. Is the eggshell broken? Is it smaller? Is it something cracking? Yes, and also the one is maturity. So you can understand you have mature egg that you frozen, but that's it. You cannot see
Mhm.
the egg yolk. You don't know how the egg yolk tastes. I know, not that
Right.
you taste
No.
any real eggs, but
That's a
but
great analogy, I love it.
yeah. So as I said, go into supermarket buy eggs, but the certainty why you put yourself through is one day,
Mhm.
that 4 or 5 years, depend on age. So if you are 31 and you're not having a baby until 36, then let's say you had your first baby, this becomes the most precious things you have, because now you have backup at 36. You come to me for 31-year-old eggs, especially for your second child or your third child. So the
Mhm.
further you go, if you have 40 to use the eggs, then yes, it's worth it. But now if I have a patient telling me, Dr. Luke, I have my first child at 29. I just want one more. Can we do egg freezing? I said, how old you are now? Well, I'm 32. I'm like, okay, maybe just have sex for your second
Mhm.
child. You're thinking about having a baby. Why do you need to freeze eggs? So
Mhm.
I challenge them, because there's
Right.
no purpose. You're 32. Hopefully it was as good as before. Or it's your first time wanting a baby. I said,
Mhm.
okay, if you have a baby back to back at 29, your first, hopefully at 30, your second at 30, why are you freezing? For what? And
Mhm.
yes, it's true that Dr. Lu, what about the patient ends up being bad at 32, 33? Well, the chance is actually a little bit lower. So if you're
Mhm.
early, kind of a patient who early being an early mommy, a little bit early in your early 30s or late 20s, the reasoning of doing egg freezing become less if you want the child as a younger mommy. That
Right.
egg freezing becomes more important as you become older, as in the eggs may be worse. So the ratio, the
Mhm.
benefit becomes significant enough that you want to do egg freezing.
For sure. Do you cap off an age for people of when they would freeze
That's a
eggs?
great question. I'm seeing patients now 39, 44, even 41.
Mm.
I give them really heart to heart discussion where I would just tell them, hey, you're 41. And now there's some calculators out there. I'm making my little reference some journal articles. But really, if you plug in one egg, 41, or five eggs, because as you get older, sometimes you don't have as many eggs. So quantity in this scenario becomes important, just FYI for your
Right.
audience, because it's the belief, but there's also that guessing, because that's why it's
Right.
calculated over a big range. You're like, is that useful or not useful? Any case, my patient always say, Dr. Luke, is that useful to give me a percentage? When you say it's 5% and I am the 5%, then it's become 100%. So thank you. I'm like, okay, I'm just giving you some data.
Right.
Anyway,
Well, I do think it's good to have those numbers though, because without it, then again,
you have nothing.
yeah.
So basically at 40, 41, we usually talk about 10 to 20%. Again, the extrapolation of data is not that many. Because of COVID, good and bad, not many patients came in to thaw their eggs during COVID. So there was a 2 or 3 years of data kind of emptiness to the world.
Mm,
So
right.
lots of this data are more extrapolation, either from patients with breast cancer who came
Right.
back to get their eggs, or patients who are doing egg donor. Egg donor have lots of data because they're
Right.
under 28. That's why they say it's 50, 60%. So that hasn't changed for that group of patients. But then when you're 40, 41, not many people are, first of all, you cannot donate eggs. So it is really freezing from themselves. Some
Right.
of them didn't thaw the eggs, but right now it's between 10, 20%. And I usually very honest with them. Hey, I only see three eggs, and I can minus here, divide here when some of the basis is 10 eggs at 35%, 50 to 60%. So if you're 40, 41, really is not that high. Is
Well,
it worth
my
it?
thing then also it has to fertilize and then get to blast, you know? So that's I always kind of pull in my story. I had 13 eggs retrieve, 11 frozen, and none of them fertilized, you know? So
Sorry to hear that. But
I think that's the part where people don't understand. Like it's one thing to get those 3 eggs from a 41-year-old, but then it's plus plus, right? We still need to go through a few steps to see
and is
if
that
if
15,
they'll make it.
20% worth it for you for the five
Right.
6,000 you're spending? And some of them say yes, because they're going to be 45. They want to come, because at 45 is like less than single digit, it's 5%
Right.
even chance. So if you tell me you're waiting for, if I'm like, well, is 15%, well, 50% three times, Dr. Lucas. See, they, whoever wants to, they always have the reasoning. It's also from patient, but then I also have patient, 2 hours later, I have a patient say, I'm not going to put myself for 15. That's not worth it. Thank you,
Right.
Dr. Luke. Bye bye.
Yeah.
there are also that, and I think it's really person to person, or women
Of
to women.
course. Yes. And I think that goes back to kind of the data that you were talking about earlier with the AMH and all of the things is it really is important for you to work with your doctor specifically on your body because it doesn't matter how old you are, what your AMH is, everybody is individual. So you can look at my story or somebody else's or whatever and try to self-diagnose based on someone else's story, but really it depends on your individual body and what you're putting into it and your stress levels and all the things, and working with your doctor closely to track that and see where the gaps are and how you can get to your baby is the most important than just going off of, you know,
Absolutely.
things that
Absolutely.
you read or see or hear from. What's some advice that you would give a couple that is starting to go down the road of meeting with a fertility doctor for the first time?
I think it depending on the journey. So everything is a little bit same as any specialty. You want a doctor that really listen to you, understand your need. I heard lots of couples when they come from another doctor is when the first doctor didn't understand they wanted more time for sex. So I
Mm,
try to listen as much because not that I want to cater to what they need. My job is to educate and inform. How they choose the path, they still have to, because you need that mental, emotional preparation to get to that path. I
right.
have patients who really not interested in IVF, even though I'm like, you need IVF now. But they were not interested, they've been too. So I will try to do, hey, I can help you with your uterus. I can check all the other tubes. But at the end, and then I will put a plug in it and say, if the sperm and the egg cannot, I've seen it because I've seen great sperm, great egg. Well, she's young at 34, great
Mhm,
tube. Why would they not meet? Like, why can they? So sometimes, yeah, that
mhm.
molecular level where the sperm and the egg just whatever. And this is where the unknown, again, educating the unknown.
Right.
Look, why it's not working. And I hate that term called unexplained fertility, which is one of the worst terms that can create it. That is called unexplained, where we don't know why the sperm and the egg is not jiving. And
Mhm.
so they need IVF. I've seen it. And really they just needed that IVF, which means I poked the sperm into
Right.
and then all this, her whole family is created after they struggle for 2 years. And the younger you are, the higher the chances can happen. Like lots of the 28, 29, they went through this, that, all the four things. And I see the embryos later. To answer your question, is really understanding if the doctor is really listening to you, and to present the facts. At the end, it's three of I guess it's fertility. It's medical necessity to have a family in so many ways. I don't want to say elective because it's not nice. Some people feel
Mhm.
like having a child is part of important, but it is three people driving the bus. And it is important that everyone had that kind of understanding as we move on. And because there's so many unknowns. Even
Right.
evaluate the uterus, you can go this way, you can go this way. So even that has so much discussion and communication. And I'm doing my best. Throughout my years, my communication hopefully is more clean and more precise to get to where they are asking, and even foreseeing what they don't know what they're asking.
Of course.
So
Because
I
they
can.
don't know what they don't know usually when they're coming to see you, right? I mean, they may learn some of it from Googling or whatever, but it's this whole new world, a whole new language of things they haven't heard before.
And I think is to really get to the bottom of it that knowns are not unknown. Like when you and then some doctors may not even realize, because all of us medical profession want to know everything. You're coming to an expert, so I will tell you I know. But I think the greatest doctor you will see is that they admit they don't know. They admit that they cannot be seen. That's from the outside. Like the
Right.
egg. How good are my eggs? It should be good. 20,
Right.
but no, we don't know. So I think that is one part of.
Love that you say that because that's a huge part of what I always tell people is you want to go to a fertility doctor, I call it to get the lay of the land, right? Because if you're going down this road and you've been trying for over a year only to find out that you have blocked tubes or something in your uterus, you want to know that before you keep going. Time is not on our side. So you don't have to walk into the fertility doctor thinking, oh, IVF, this means I have to do this. No, you just want to see from an expert, specialty doctor in fertility versus I always say you're not going to go to an orthopedic for something that's not required by them. and get the lay of the land. Figure out, is everything working the way it's supposed to be working? And then, again, that's your data to move forward with your next decision. And especially if your doctor is listening to you, they can then help you to navigate that. Maybe it is go home and try naturally by having sex for another 6 months and let me know how it goes. You're wasting your time because both tubes are blocked, like at least you'll know what you're dealing with. And I think that's a huge part of the puzzle for a lot of people, is just uncovering those unknowns and having the control of what they can control, like controlling the controllables, as I like to say. Because in this world, so
I
much
like
of it
that.
is not in
Control
our
the
hands.
controllables. That's a good title. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Luke. It's been so fun to chat with you about all of these things. No doubt I could talk to you for more hours, but I know you have
Yes.
lots of
And,
babies to
and,
go
and and
create.
actually, by the way, you gave a great title. Maybe I'll put that on my control the controllables is back to the number one, which is the finance. How
Yes.
to control and what insurance plan down the year. So that actually was a great tie-in to back to the original. We were talking about the one,
Where
two,
we started.
yes,
Yes.
we started.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for being here. Where can everyone find you, Dr. Luke?
You can find me at my website at generationnextfertility.com or at my Instagram handle at Good Luck Luke. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my assistant in case
Yes.
I forgot. And yeah, Google Janelle Luke, Luke.
And your podcast.
And my podcast, yes, thank you. Heart to Heart, Spotify and
All the
YouTube.
places
Yeah.
podcasts are available. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you again for your time. And if anyone is in the New York area and or outside of the New York area, in fact, the client that I'm referring to flew from Miami to get pregnant with her twins
Oh,
from Dr. Luke.
yes.
And so, even if you're not local to that area and you have been struggling, it's worth having a consult with Generation Next and Dr. Luke. So thank you again for your time
Oh, thank
today.
you, Elizabeth, for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Creation Innovation Podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify for free episodes and subscribe to the Creation Innovation Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you choose to get your podcast. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening for a chance to receive a special gift. Yes, we actually do send out gifts. It's my favorite thing to do. So visit us at elizabethking.com/creation innovation for more information on how to enter. Every review counts, and we are so grateful. You can follow me at the official Elizabeth King on Instagram or TikTok. Until next time.